Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Caleb and Alina. Cheryl says, I was watching this episode and I was thinking about my son. He has a neurological disease and has trouble walking and talking. When you meet him, it takes a minute to adjust to his needs. I think there is a learning curve with handicaps, especially if you have never been around a disabled person. Yeah, absolutely. And part of the problem is that we, invisibilize or reject or oppress people with disabilities, so people don't get a chance to be around them and don't have an opportunity to learn how to adjust. Celeste says, I love Alina as well, Dr. Honda. I don't think Caleb is the right guy for her, though. He isn't ready for the responsibility. Yeah, I mean, there's signs of that. It's hard to know. It's hard to know if he's just kind of a goofball on some level, or if he's truly not ready for the responsibility. It's also not clear if Alina needs someone to be responsible for her. I mean, she seems extremely competent and easygoing. So, I don't know. I guess we'll see how it plays out. Allie says, if it was the reverse and a woman after a long flight said she was tired and didn't want to be physical the first night, would our reaction be the same? Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting thought experiment that we do sometimes and that y'all will do, thinking if the genders were reversed, would we have a different reaction? It's not always an analogous situation. Men have more power in societies. Typically, men have different ideas about, on average, about who they are. So it's not always a direct analogy, but it is interesting to think about. And for Caleb, when he arrived after being on a plane for God knows how many hours, and he's just like, yeah, I just want to go to bed. And we're like, hey, that's not nice. But if a woman did that, like I remember when Yara got off the plane, she was just like, ugh. And would we feel the same way about it? I think it's worthy to think about that, because we don't want to have double standards about that thing. And it might reveal our bias. When we see Caleb doing that, we're like, hey, and the bias, what is the bias there? To think, I don't know what it is, but to speculate, it's possible that we think men are always supposed to be up for sex. And this is a huge thing that I have to disabuse many clients of, this notion that men are just walking erections and are constantly up for having sex, and if they're ever not in the mood or tired or something, then that means they're not a real man. Or if it's a heterosexual relationship, as a woman, you're not attractive enough or something. And the same rule applies to all humans. Sometimes we're in the mood and sometimes we're not. And there's a spectrum. Some people are in the mood more often than other people. And there's some correlation with gender, but it's not, it's not a always, never sort of a thing. So we want to think about that. And this, I think another bias at play is that men are not allowed to be tired. Men are not allowed to not have energy. Men are not allowed to need things, to need a break. Whereas women are also, whenever I say things about men that are negative in terms of socialization, the same applies to women. Okay, here's the topic sentence. We socialize everyone, regardless of gender, in very negative ways in our society. The things that we do in Seattle to children, there's commonalities around the world, but I can really only speak to mainstream culture in Seattle. And we will, for example, oppress boys by saying you can't feel emotions. But that's not like we let girls feel emotions either. It's just, on average, less so of an oppression, less so of a negative socialization than we do to boys. Every child is shamed for their emotions. Boys are just shamed more. Every child is shamed for their bodies. Girls are just shamed more. It's that kind of thing. Anyway, so when we look at the differences, and we think we swap the genders on some of these people, it kind of reveals what's going on. Zoe says, whenever my roommate and I watch 90 Day, we are always so baffled when people don't understand that after you travel a long time, sometimes the only thing on that person's mind is taking a shower and laying down. Yeah, agreed. Abby says, "Hi, Dr. Honda. I think it's good that Caleb voices what he's thinking when he lets Alina know that he had imagined things differently. It's not totally brutal, but it's honest." Yeah, that's what I was, it's hard to know, and we'd have to ask Alina how she feels about it. But I was on, when Caleb was thinking, oh, she's smaller than I thought she would be. He wasn't saying, and I'm out, or I thought she was 5 feet tall. He just said, oh, she's shorter than I thought she actually was. And so on one hand, I was like, well, people are entitled to, like Caleb, a bit of a surprise. And I think whenever you see someone in 3D, there's always going to be a bit of a mismatch. Sometimes when people meet me, or they'll see a picture of me or something, they'll be like, oh, you're taller than I thought. For some reason, people think I'm short. I don't know why. And the reason why this, and I think I've talked about this before, the reason why that assumption about me being short really kind of tweaks me is that as a child, I was gargantuan, and people sort of caught up to me. They never, I'm 6'1", but as a kid, I was the tallest kid in class and was considered a giant. People ran in fear from me as jokes. They're just like, oh my God, here comes the, in sixth grade or whatever. I looked like a man, anyway, so for people to think I'm short, I'm like, huh? Anyway, so 3D, you meet someone, there's some surprises. So on one hand, we'd say for Caleb that, it's normal to, maybe Alina said, oh, he's taller than I thought, whatever, But on the other hand, it's like, well, there's a lot of indications indicating that you might not have fully thought about the reality that was before you. You had all the data, you just didn't really think about it enough. There seems to be some, like for example with Caleb, you would think he would do more research about accessibility and wheelchairs and just all that kind of thing, instead of, he seems to be just completely oblivious to the whole thing, which on one hand, it's kind of normal. It's unfortunate. But on the other hand, you're like, okay, you've had several weeks of thinking about, I'm going to be with this person. Maybe I should Google it. Julia says, or ask Alina, just, hey, and that's the other thing about this show that just seems so baffling. There seems to be so little communication. My impression about these couples on the show is that when they're online communicating, they're talking about like just surface things, just positive things. Oh my God, you're so great. They're always shooting at the best angle. I mean, not all of them, using filters or whatever. And then they meet in person and suddenly like everything's becomes a reality. And you're just thinking like, and then I think, well, of course people are like this because we want to live in a fantasy world because it's so much better there. Julia says, the law. So I was asking about, in the United States, I was like, I'm pretty sure that we have a code in the United States that means that you have to provide accessibility, and for Caleb to not realize that other countries might not have that, I think is on one hand understandable. On the other hand, you should probably Google it. Julia is saying, the law in the United States is that all public buildings must be accessible, but not necessarily convenient, which is a big difference. I have spent a lot of time with my family member who is disabled, going through very convoluted back alleys and entrances and service passages to get to the one elevator in the building. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that. That's unfortunate. You'd think that it would be maybe for older buildings or some grandfathering in. Anyway, Gino and Jasmine, the waitress episode. Eek says, Seattle native and Panama resident here. There is tipping in Panama. It is voluntary, not obligatory, but it is customary. Interesting. I didn't know that. Seattle native living in Panama. Actually, a really good friend of mine lived in Panama for a long time and really loved it. But Eek goes on to say, Jasmine is psycho, absolutely nuts. There is nothing about her behavior that is okay. If a man insisted on proof of my interactions with waitstaff, etc., and constantly demanding to see the phone, no, I would never tolerate such behavior. Yeah, so again, if we swap the genders, if Jasmine was a man and demanding proof and being controlling and using emotional abuse to control, to not let him talk to women in public, it's just an interaction with the waitress, then we would instantly, I hope, see that as a humongous set of red flags, if not just flat out abusive. Whereas when Jasmine does it, it just seems like, oh, well, she's just kind of jealous, I guess. And we really want to check that, particularly because women can absolutely be abusive. Of the perpetrators of the abuse, high control, absolute abusive behavior, a good percentage are women. It's a lesser percentage than it is for men, but a good percentage are women. And the fact that we have a hard time visualizing that sometimes, or seeing it, as in the case of Jasmine, is a sign of our ignorance and our lack of raising awareness. And of course, if you're in a heterosexual relationship as a man and you're being abused, you don't want to come forward because you're like, am I the only one? Am I just making this up? So yeah, we absolutely want to identify. Now, is Jasmine a horrible, evil person? I don't know. But we do want to identify it as like, that's not okay. Even if Jasmine is coming from a good place or whatever, that's not okay. That's not okay behavior. You can't control people in that way. You can speak from your heart and say, okay, when you're talking to the waitress, it triggers me. It makes me feel jealous. Can we talk about that? That's okay. But to just use emotional control. Although I will say that Jasmine's presentation is interesting because she can swing very quickly, like in that waitress scene, from being a textbook controlling to totally flexible and not upset. She's like, give me some space. She goes into the bathroom, she changes, she comes back out. She just seemed like completely fine. So it makes, and when she's being controlling, she doesn't seem like she's raging. It seems more like, I don't know, like a put on. It's hard to know, and we'll, I guess, probably see as time goes on. And let me know what you think in the comments. But it almost looks like Jasmine is faking being controlling or something. I can't really. And then I wonder, well, why would she do that? And the only thing I can think of is that she thinks that he wants him to. She thinks he wants her to be that way, to demonstrate to him that she really likes him. Like somehow they got that repertoire going. Because, Gino doesn't seem to be that put off by it. I mean, he's like, whoa, she's pretty controlling, but he seems to roll with it pretty quickly as well. So I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting dynamic because we can contrast Jasmine's demeanor with Angela's demeanor. Angela with Michael, seasons ago, Angela wouldn't just suddenly be nice. It was weeks or, several episodes of her being raging and controlling and upset and putting him down and insulting and physically assaultive. Whereas Jasmine just seems to it just turns off. So I'm curious about that. Mia says, Gino interprets her controlling behavior as love and commitment, and that makes me worried for him. Yeah. Again, it's hard to know where that relationship is headed because, I know from the comments that a lot of people consider Gino and Jasmine to be, kind of odd, particularly Gino being pretty weird. But there's some signs that their relationship is going actually pretty well. They seem genuinely in love. They seem to genuinely like each other. They're both kind of dorky in a similar way. I mean, you say, well, Gino's a total dork, but you're like, well, Jasmine's not a non-dork. That'd be a great t-shirt. I am not a non-dork. Ella and Johnny, oh boy, Asian Prince episode. Omar says, low-key hurt that Dr. Honda named Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, etc., and just skipped Malaysia. And remember, there's Central Asia, Iran, and all the stands in the Middle East. End of comment. Yeah. So on one hand, I absolutely missed several countries. I also missed Myanmar, I believe, Bhutan. Did I mention Taiwan or Mongolia? I can't remember, but so on one hand, I was listing all the, and by the way, I should have said East Asian. When people say, oh, you're Asian in Seattle, when they say, oh, you're Asian, they're not referring to Iran. They're referring to East Asia. So sometimes we have to qualify. And sometimes is India considered Asian, or do we specifically say South Asian? So there's been various different label systems over the years. So I should have said East Asian, but so on one hand, I absolutely did not mention some countries, which is bad. On the other hand, I was going off the top of my head, and I have to say, like, I didn't plan on trying to list every East Asian country, and I feel like I did pretty good. I mean, on considering that. And after I recorded that, I kind of looked at a map, and I was like, did I miss any? I was like, oh, I missed Malaysia, but I also missed, Papua New Guinea. I don't think I mentioned Mongolia. Anyway, so, I hear you, Omar, and Malaysia. Hibiki says, while she knows the weird... Who are we talking about here? I need to look. Yeah, Ella and Johnny. While Ella knows the weird demonstration of her sword technique in kimono-looking outfit... While Ella knows the weird demonstration of her sword technique in kimono-looking outfit and talks about her infatuation towards samurai cosplay, anime, all the Japanese glories that foreigners can think of, but she lands a Chinese man. This totally displays her yellow fever and is on a very superficial level. As a Japanese woman born and raised, I always avoided dating this kind of man when I was in the United States. Yeah, I don't think I mentioned this as well. I mean, it seemed pretty obvious to me, but I don't think I said it out loud, which is, okay, her obsession is with all Japanese things. It wasn't even Korean things. It was like all Japanese things. It was the anime and the manga and the samurai sword and the all that stuff, and the outfits. And then she dates a Chinese man. I'm like, is anyone going to tell Ella that China and Japan are different countries, like very different countries? I try to tell white people like how it'd be like the difference between like Spain and Poland or something, or maybe even further afield than that, really, like Spain and Russia, or Spain and Iran, or like China and Japan are very different places. The fact that I have to say that, is just interesting. So there's that. Plus, they haven't had a great history with each other. As a Japanese person, in fact, I have ancestors who lived in Japanese-occupied Korea for I don't know how many years back in the 19th to 20th century. And also in China. I had relatives that lived in China in what they called Manchuria. Anyway, so on behalf of my people, I apologize to all Koreans and Chinese. I'm sure that doesn't make up for all of the genocide that happened. Anyway, my point is that you're obsessed with Japan. Yeah. Ella, it gives an interesting opportunity for me as a Asian American, East Asian American, Japanese American, to talk about exotification, talk about tokenism, to talk about racism, to talk about ignorance. And foreignification is another thing that happens. I'm sure there's a better word for that. But the point is that, to this day, people ask me, where are you from? They see my slanty eyes and like, where are you from? And I'm just like, oh, like really? Especially when I step outside Seattle. Like Seattle is a pretty diverse group of people, particularly a lot of Asian and East Asian Americans. And if you live in Seattle, you probably have internalized, if you're a white person, the notion that just because someone looks East Asian doesn't mean that they just got off the boat. It could be that they're, for example, for me, my Japanese ancestors came around the year 1900, 121 years ago, and came to Washington State, by the way. So, anyway, I always say this. It's just like, I am probably in the top 1% of Washingtonian natives. You know what I mean? Like in terms of course, not the Native Americans, but in terms of like, where are you from? That I should be asking you that question. Where are you from, white person? Because you're probably not from Washington. You're probably not from Seattle. Anyway, so that it's just that extra kind of insult. But and it's not the worst thing. I mean, in terms of, for me, racist objectification or harm that happens to me. I mean, that's I don't cry myself to sleep at night personally because of that, but it just, after the 500th time you get asked, it's just like, really, people, really, white people? Like, we've been here a long time. Get that into your head. White does not mean American. In fact, white people are less than 50%. So if you just think of an American, you should think of a brown person, because they're probably right in the middle. Anyway. So with Ella, it's hard to know what's happening there, and it gives us an opportunity to talk. We would have to talk to Ella and be like, what's going on? Do you see Johnny as a fully fledged human being? And I guess we'll find out as the season goes. Because it's one thing to be attracted to a culture and to a particular person because of their culture or because of their ethnicity or their race or the color of their skin or something. But if you also do not see them as a fully fledged human being, then that's when the problems set in, right? But if you see someone as a fully fledged human being, there are, as an East Asian American, over the years of my life, there have been times when white people will be attracted to me, either romantically or platonically, because I'm Japanese American. They'll just be like, they wouldn't necessarily tell me that up front, but as we're in a relationship, I start looking at, their ex-boyfriends or their other friends, and I'm like, oh, you're a white person that has a lot of Asians, particularly Japanese partners in your past or friends or something. And so it's like, am I being objectified? But for those people, I personally would not fault them. It'd be the same as if a white person was attracted to white people, or an East Asian person likes to date other East Asian people. Sometimes we have this, and there's volumes of books that we could talk in terms of discussion around that topic, because that's pretty complicated as well. And of course, we internalize messages that are associated with different ethnicities that are problematic. Like with black people, black men are often seen as violent or, hyper masculine or dangerous or something. And East Asian men are seen as like weak and feminine and all these kinds of things. So, there's all sorts. And then the dating data plays out that way, that East Asian men will often complain about the fact that not only do white women not want to date them, but Asian women don't want to date them because they want a more masculine male type, and they see East Asian men as not particularly masculine. So, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of problems, of course, all genders. But I will say that the people that I think were attracted to me because I was Japanese American, I'm just thinking of a few people off the top of my head. Once I got to know them and their preference, I said, well, I think that was a spark that might have got our relationship going, but they see me as a fully fledged human being, and I'm sure they didn't see me purely because of my race. It was probably like a set of things, or 10 things that attracted them to me as a friend or a partner. And one of them happened to be the fact that I was Asian. And it might have even been subconscious for them. So, it's complicated. For Ella, is that part of it? And so we could say, if it is, then that's okay. Or is she completely just painting this picture, this projection onto Johnny of a samurai anime warrior and not seeing him for who he really is? Now, of course, the common problem, as Hibiki is talking about, is that a lot of East Asian women are exoticized in this way and seen as like subservient and obedient and all these kinds of things. A lot of white men looking for an obedient, loyal partner will seek out East Asian women. And I think I said in the episode, it's just like, newsflash, East Asian women are not subservient or obedient any more so than white. I mean, like, take it from me, who has a lot of not only Asian people in my life, but also relatives. No, East Asian women are not. If you're looking for, I don't know who you look for if you're looking for obedience and subservience, but East Asian women are not that. So now, they might be very polite. Japanese people tend to be very polite on average, but Japanese people can be some of the rudest people on the planet at the same time. So, whatever stereotype you have in your mind about human beings, it's probably an oversimplification. But anyway, so the problem is then, when these white men seek out these East Asian, subservient women, and then will try to engineer the relationship that way. We could accuse some of the other cast members. Was Ed doing that a little bit? Hard to know. So now, and that's pretty deplorable, right? And, just straw personing, having a projection and then trying to control the other person. Anyway. Good old Lorraine says, I cried listening to Ella talk about all the pain she endured from fat shaming as a kid, and as an adult, I think. I don't know what to make of her Asian preference, though. Is it an obsession? But it seems she didn't look into finding a man in Asia until after having struggled with dating locally. She just wants the same love and companionship and acceptance that we all want. I hope this works out well for her and for Johnny. Right. So imagine if Jovi was obsessed with Ukrainian culture and had all these DVDs of movies from Ukraine, or had certain outfits that were traditional Ukrainian. I don't even know if that exists. I'm sure it does. Knew about all the TV shows from Ukraine. Just imagine that Jovi was obsessed with Ukraine in this way. Would we look at Jovi and say, ooh, you're doing something that's racist? And I find that this is the discourse typically, in comments and people emailing, is that Ella is racist. And I think that, especially when it comes to a more nuanced topic like this, that, fine, say racist, but clarify what you mean by racist. Because certainly the word racism can be applied to a lot of different things. It can be applied to lynchings, for example, and that, just killing someone because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity, or genocide. In those situations, we're like, well, yeah, that's racism. The Holocaust, for example, at its height, and it's obvious that there's a racist element there, and it's horrible, and there's tons of harm. And so we use the same word, racism, for genocide and and the Holocaust, as we do for Ella, who seems to be just super interested in anime manga culture. Are those on the same level? No, they're not. So we need to clarify what we mean by that. And I think it really depends, and it depends on Johnny. We have to ask Johnny, and I wish that people did more of this sort of thing. Because in the way that we live on Twitter and all the things today is, we'll see someone wearing a dress from, there was that high school girl in Utah, I think, that wore a Chinese dress. And a lot of people who were not Chinese were, bullying this woman, this girl, this high school girl, because she wore a Chinese dress. I wish, and as an Asian person, and I would talk to other Chinese people, and they're like, I don't care if she wears a Chinese traditional dress. Why would I care about that? Like, go for it. She looks nice in the dress. Who cares? Were there some Chinese people who were upset? Yeah, but I didn't meet any of those people. So we have to ask the individuals. We want to raise the flag. Well, wait a second, what's going on? And this doesn't apply to all situations, but I think it does to this. Because if Ella is doing something that could be wrong, the person that she is wronging is Johnny. Now, you could argue that she's wronging an entire group of people because of the vibe that she has or something. But the primary person we have to ask is Johnny. When we'd ask Johnny, do you feel that she is two-dimensioning you? Do you feel that she is trying to pigeonhole you? Do you feel like she's projecting onto you? Do you feel like she's exploiting you? Do you feel hurt that she's exotifying you? How do you feel, Johnny, about that? Because there's a chance that Johnny is doing the same thing to her. And as they get to know each other, they'll three-dimension each other, And in that instance, we would say, like, okay, maybe there was some issues there. Maybe there's some participation in exotification or foreignification or whatever. Or lumping in all of East Asia into one culture. And, it's not a great thing. But it's not on the scale of Holocaust and genocide, or laws that prevent people from voting, or police practices that result in the death of people because of their ethnicity, assumptions about, oh, they're dangerous, I'm going to shoot them. So we just have to be careful about throwing around the word racist. Is Ella racist? I don't know. We'll see. Are there things to talk about? Sure. And I have given it probably much too much time. Sky says, I'm possibly guilty of exoticizing Asian culture. My best friend happens to be Vietnamese, and my boyfriend is Thai. Ever since I'm assuming Sky is white. Ever since I've been growing up, I've had a love for what I think Asian culture is. I don't even know why. Thai food is my favorite, and I love anime and learning the language and many other things. But I agree that I think I really only know very little about the actual cultures and only see the cool parts. I think for me, it's really just a style of everything. But meeting my boyfriend, I realize there's a lot more to the culture that doesn't fit what American society would assume. One thing with Thai culture I'm not fond of is the penis necklaces for protection. It's not my thing. End of comment. Yeah. Well, one, I'm guessing, Sky, that if you're a typical millennial, white American, you really only absorb Japanese culture, maybe a little Korean culture, if you were into K-pop or something. And there's some movies coming out of Korea that are really great, Parasite being one. So your boyfriend is Thai, which is far-flung from Japan and Korea. So I'm guessing that when you started to date your boyfriend, you really had to start from scratch in terms of Thai culture. Now, might some Thai people in America, be very much more oriented towards anime and manga and K-pop and J-pop because of just that's the dominant East Asian cultural infestation, if you will, of the United States. Sure, but anyway. But yeah, so Sky is saying, I think I'm actually, I kind of have some yellow fever, both friends and partners. And I don't even know why. I think it's just a preference. Yeah, again, we don't want to say racist. Like, slow down. Like, we'd have to ask ourselves, It'd be like if I, as a Seattleite who has never really spent that much time in Texas, I was just super fascinated with barbecue and being on a ranch and wearing a cowboy hat and going on a rodeo. And maybe I want to be friends with rodeo people. Am I racist for being attracted to that? Possibly, but possibly not. It's okay to be, some people, they just love France, and they just want to go there all the time and they learn French and, they're just, for some reason, they're just really into that sort of thing. And is that racist? Is it harmful? Because that's what we want to ask ourselves. Is that person doing something unfair to someone else? Are they harming other people? Because otherwise, it's just a preference, In the same way, like I said earlier, if you're a white American and you're interested in white American culture, or you're a black American and you're interested in black American culture, it's just a preference. It's okay. It's not inherently harmful to have a preference. It can be harmful. Like I said, anyway, I feel like I've beat that dead horse. Is that the phrase? Good old political troll says, it seems that Johnny is really into cowboy stuff, so I think the ranch was a positive for him, unlike the Julia situation. Yeah, it could be. Tim and Jennifer, good old Tim and Jennifer, getting into them. Elias says, I once overheard a family friend explicitly saying, stop crying, boys don't cry, to her 3-year-old son. 3 years old. I always knew that the message of emotional repression and shame for men was ingrained in our society, but I had never heard it stated so plainly. Indeed, Elia. Heather says, a lot of my male clients have mentioned this too. So in the episode I was talking about toxic masculinity and da-da-da. A lot of my male clients have mentioned this too, and how they have a difficult time being able to express their feelings and how they've been taught to act tough. It's been rewarding helping them to relearn how to express their feelings, and I'm glad that you talk about this topic a lot in your videos because it's extremely important. Yeah. Well, good, Heather. I'm glad that... I always love hearing from the fellow therapist, by the way. So if you're a therapist out there and you comment mention you're a therapist, because I don't know if I've mentioned this before in these videos, but the whole reason why I started this podcast 13 and a half years ago is because I actually thought only therapists would listen, because I'm like, why would lay people want to hear me yammer about these technical things? So I was always hoping to get a lot of therapists listening. So I like it when I hear about therapists, paying attention on YouTube. Kat says, well, this is curious. I am a woman, and I too transformed my sadness into anger. I was talking about how when I was a kid, I transferred my sadness, crying, into anger. I'm a woman, and I too transformed my sadness into anger when I was a teenager, because when I cried, I was accused of being hysterical and a drama queen. I've been in therapy for 2 years, and it's still difficult to cry. It's like my natural impulse now when I feel sad is to be angry. It's curious to think that as a woman, I too suffered from this shame about crying. Yeah, as I said earlier, everyone is shamed for crying, men just more so on average. Can you have a woman who was just as shamed for crying as the average man? Absolutely. But Meredith says, I appreciate your yammerings. Yeah, so I think in that episode, that reaction video, I yammered for a long time, which I'm doing right now. Meredith says, I appreciate the yammerings. We need to talk about this more often, about toxic masculinity. We have had the Me Too movement, and women have spoken out about mistreatment, but we don't talk enough about toxic masculinity. In college, one of my first serious relationships was with a man who was exuberant, outgoing, intellectual, and not a man's man. One of my friends judged him and said to me, are you sure he's not gay? I instantly was hurt and was not friends with her from that day forward. Clearly, that friend had interjected some very strict ideals about men. Her dad is a stoic state trooper, and toxic masculinity. Yeah, I mean, there's several layers to that. One is the toxic masculine notion there that if you're exuberant, outgoing, intellectual, and not a man, you're not macho, that you must be not a man or you're gay or something, which is a whole problem. The other problem is what's wrong with being gay? Like what? So your friend's like, are you sure he's not gay? It's like, okay, well, he's dating me anyway. So, but that's what toxic masculinity is all based on, is as a man, you are taught very explicitly growing up as a boy that you will do everything to avoid being seen or misperceived as a woman or a gay man. Everything is geared around that. And if emotions are associated with women, if crying is associated with women, if being not macho is associated with being a gay man, then you will do everything to avoid. And it's one thing to just act a certain way, like I'm going to act macho, but if there's any kind of accusation, like, oh, you're gay, or you're flouncy, or you're weak, or you're exuberant, or you gossip about things like women do, then you have to fight that person. If someone accuses, everyone has seen this, right? Someone accused, hey, what are you, gay? You touched me. You're at a bar or something. What are you, an F word? You're gay. You're touching me. And then you're supposed to fight. That's what you're supposed to do in that instance. And it's like, what? Like, who cares? Like, what if I was gay? Like, I'm sorry I bumped into you. Diana says, thank you for going into toxic masculinity and how it starts at a young age just by being part of society. I'm a clinician with a 5-year-old boy. When he was one, when my son was one, I started drawing faces with different emotions and would have him tell me what the face was feeling. Now he does an amazing job with expressing a wide range of his own emotions. I was so proud when his kindergarten teacher told me he is really expressive and uses words to describe how he's feeling in the moment. Someone instinctually told him, it's okay, don't cry. And before I could jump in, he said, I can cry whenever I want to. Oh my goodness, Diana. That's amazing. I mean, I get chilled. Let's just really dive into this. So, Diana, your 5-year-old son, since he was a toddler, you've been teaching him very explicitly, frequently about different emotions, which I've done that kind of work with kids too. It's really... it's easier to teach about emotions if you have these pictures of faces, and so he's he talks about his emotions really well. And someone in kindergarten or somewhere said, it's okay, don't cry. And he's like, I can cry whenever I want to. Why are you telling me not to cry? Like, to think about that, about your son, about what an amazing human being he's going to be. Like, that is incredible. And just think, if everyone just parented this way, like how we could change things. And we're not, I'm gonna take a guess and say that 99% of parents, even in progressive, liberal Seattle circles, are not doing what you're doing, Diana. So, and that's why, like, my dream, that me and my wife's dream that we came up with not too long ago, because we were thinking, like, what do we want to do, with the podcast? Where do we want to take, what would be our dream? And we came up with this dream of starting an institute to train young parents, to train novice parents, train new parents, how to do all these things, how to properly attune, how to create secure attachments, and how to not harm children through gender socialization. And of course, those programs are out there, the research is out there, but I don't feel like we're doing enough. And we could end so many problems. Research shows that if we do that kind of work, even if it's from the outside, meaning that clinicians intervene or, teachers intervene and teach the parents, that you can reduce so many things: violence, school dropout, drug abuse, crime. What did I ever say that? Divorce, them growing up to be abusive, their own parents. There's just so many things. Conspiracy mindedness, all sorts of depression, anxiety, and psychosis. Like, there's so many things that can be reduced if we put more effort on a public health level into helping novice parents. We don't do anything, which I find to just be bizarre. I mean, with all the efforts that we do in society, and it's like we're trying to stop a flood, and we're just like getting little shovels instead of like building a wall, like, build a levee. But every time a flood happens, well, get the shovel out and start digging some. And it's just like, you realize that if we put effort proactively, we could we could reduce our prison population down to like 10% maybe. There's so many things that could be solved this way. And mass shootings, political strife, so many things could be solved this way. And we just don't. I know there's some efforts along those lines, but we don't do it. And so I thought, that would be my dream. I don't know if I'll ever get around to it, but that's our dream. Debbie, this is an email from an anonymous listener from Los Angeles. She writes, "Hi, Dr. Honda. I just watched your first video reacting to Debbie's Single Life episode. Although I have yet to listen to your deep dive on codependency, I somewhat related to what you were saying about Debbie and Colt's relationship. My boyfriend of 5 years lost his dad in December, and I fear he is becoming codependent with his mom. Ever since his dad suddenly passed away in their home from a seizure or stroke, my boyfriend has been extremely anxious and does not want to leave his mom alone for too long. He comes over to my house, but he says he feels guilty going out to do things without her. We talk about the future together, but whenever I casually mention something about us living together, he says that won't happen for a long time. I understand he wants to be there for his mom, and I do my best to allow him to continue grieving, but I fear he is becoming codependent." Yeah, so I'm sorry to hear about your boyfriend's father. Yeah, it's rough. And yeah, I would give your boyfriend time. But let's talk about codependency. So codependency is, in terms of, it's hard to really tell you what the definition of codependency. Listen to my whole deep dive on codependency. I go into all the definitions, but the definition that is the semi-consensus and the one that I think is the most useful essentially is boiled down to a personality disorder that makes you compelled to take care of someone else's problem, to stop someone from self-destructing, essentially. And the classic example is the codependent and the alcoholic. The alcoholic is self-destructing, and the codependent is obsessed with trying to account for their problem. But the codependent kind of needs the underfunctioner to underfunction as well, because without the underfunctioner, the codependent doesn't know what to do, because they only feel like their worth is met through helping someone with their self-destruction. Also, they don't really know what they want, so they need to focus outside of themselves. Anyway, so what you're talking about, anonymous listener, is your boyfriend lost father 5 years ago and still lives with mom and is still, we could imagine Colt might have been this way with Debbie. The son, your boyfriend, is still very worried about mom. It's not necessarily codependency. It could be. There's a red flag for that. But codependency generates from within. There's a possibility that the family is just still grieving and still adjusting. He could be terrified that mom's going to die and he's going to lose her. It could be an attachment issue. It could be a regular grief. Grief takes a long time. Dad dies, it could be 20 years before you are symptom-free from that kind of loss. So, talk about it, but it might just be that that's what he wants to do, and he just would prefer to always be there for his mom, maybe for the rest of his life. And, you just have to have that conversation. All right, this next comment from Melanie Tame says, they mentioned that Colt was a very sick baby. That and the fact that he was the only child could have started the tendency to be a helicopter, preoccupied, and overprotective parent. Yeah, interesting. I feel like I need to take more notes on the cast members because I forget, and there's so many of them and I forget. So I need to start to keep Colt. I need to keep a log of the details that we learn about people's past. Sika says, I've heard you say numerous times that the term codependent is to be used when one person has an addiction. And the proper term for any other case, for example, Debbie and Colt, is dependent. Is that correct? No. So listen to all my other episodes on codependency. But the word codependent derived from someone who was the co-alcoholic. You had the alcoholic, the person who was dependent on alcohol, and then you had the co-alcoholic. And it was just a label that they applied because they learned that they had to treat both people. And there were some personality commonalities that they would find among the co-alcoholic, but it wasn't very systematically researched. It was just like they would, because when AA and other treatment programs were first developing in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they found that they needed to help the alcoholic, but if they just sent them back home, sometimes the drinking would start back. So they needed to bring in the co-alcoholic. Eventually, they expanded it to all substances, and so they said, well, we need to call it chemical dependency, not alcoholism, because we need to include cocaine and all these other drugs. And so they changed the alcoholic to dependent, meaning that they're dependent on substances. And so they called it the codependent, meaning that the partner is also dependent on the substance. They're dependent anyway. So that's where it derived. But the term codependent has evolved over time to mean what I said earlier. And it is completely different from dependent. To be dependent, to be overly dependent, is almost the opposite of codependent. Anyway, listen to all my deep dives on that. Natalie says, Natalie video, Danielle says, I'm not really a fan of Natalie, but I definitely agree with how she handled the situation. It felt like a physical assault to me. Yeah, what was his name? Was that guy's name Johnny as well? That he just grabbed her. I was like, yeesh. Schroeds says, seeing that man grab her and pull her was straight up triggering. Yeah, I mean, it was violent. It was violent. She absolutely was justified in slapping him across the face. Absolutely. A name I can't pronounce because it's, I think, in Russian, and I don't even know. I think there's a P in there somewhere. Ukrainian. As a Ukrainian, I can tell you that victim blaming of women is up to the extreme here. For example, people will say, you wear this, you ask for an assault. You went with a stranger, you asked for an assault. Why wouldn't you just relax and enjoy it? What's even worse, if you had the guts to report it, you would hear all of this from the police officer. Natalie would be considered crazy for overreacting to this cute flirting from a Ukrainian perspective. Really? Yeesh. Yikes. Wow. So according to you, you're saying that victim blaming is alive and well. I mean, it's of course alive and well in the United States, but it sounds more severe in Ukraine. That is that's awful. A different Natalie video, Laura says, I'm Romanian, neighbors with Ukraine, and I can attest to the fact that as a woman, you always have to fight to be respected in our neck of the woods. I honestly didn't realize that a lot of stuff I went through was sexual harassment before coming to the U.S. That makes me sad. Jessica says, Hi, Dr. Honda. You will never know how much your words meant to me today. Hearing you say, you are not broken, nothing is wrong with you, made me full-on break down and cry in the middle of work, LOL. I feel like Natalie, especially right now after my last breakup. I have so much pain and trust issues. And now, since I'm turning 40, it's making me feel like, yeah, I will be alone forever. Thank you, Dr. Honor, for your words and everything you do for all of us daily. Yeah, Jessica, look, you're 40. You have, a lot of years ahead of you. And, one, you might meet your soulmate in the future. I mean, I would consider if you keep trying, there's a pretty good chance of that. The other thing is, if you don't have a soulmate, that doesn't mean that you're broken. Like, that's another thing about this. It's like, yeah, we all need attachments. We all need relationships. But if it's hard, and it is hard to find a soulmate, to find that right person, especially the person that you're going to be with forever, and to consider yourself broken or something wrong with you, it's like, I'm sure that's an internalized voice that came from outside of you that's completely not fair to you. Tanya and St. John. Monica says, I could relate a lot to Tanya and St. John. Both myself and my boyfriend are all over the place. We have no career path, no solid plans whatsoever. And just like Tanya, I try to push my boyfriend to do better because I think he has a better chance to succeed than me. Interesting. Meredith says, my best friend and I find Tanya triggering to watch sometimes. It reminds me of that saying, I love you, you're perfect, now change. Yeah. Liz says, I feel like I hear so many women complaining about having to mother their boyfriends and husbands like Tanya has to do for St. John. You have to do everything for these men. I had an ex who was like St. John times 20, chronically unemployed and lazy. For years, I found myself running into guys in the dating world who were basically just looking for a mother. I see tons of videos about it online with thousands of comments from women in agreement. It seems like an epidemic. Can you do a deep dive on this somehow? LOL. Yeah. So, yes, I do know about this. It is kind of an echo chamber. And the way I see it, and I don't know, is, and codependency knows no gender. I mean, everyone of every gender can be codependent. But women are socialized to be more codependent than men are, meaning that women are socialized not only to be dependent, but also codependent, meaning that women are socialized to believe that their worth is to be helpful and to solve other people's problems, and men are socialized to solve problems. But anyway, it's complicated. But so if you took a poll of all codependent people, I'm guessing that 60 to 70% would identify as women. I don't really know that for sure, but at the very least, there's a lot of codependent women in society who have shared experiences, meaning that by the time they're 35, they look back on their past relationships and they're like, I have been with a lot of men who are lazy, underfunctioning, incompetent, chronically unemployed, alcoholic, drug addict, childlike, all these problems. And what's wrong with men, is sort of the conclusion. Instead of what's wrong with my attraction system, why am I attracting all of the incompetent people of this town? Because, Liz, I'm here to tell you, men are not inherently incompetent. And men are not inherently lazy. They're not any more lazy than any other gender. But and the fact that you and all the other women online have had this shared experience doesn't say anything about men. It says something about you. It says something about who you're attracted to. It says something about now, you're not doing it on purpose, of course, because after the 10th deadbeat guy that you've dated, you're like, okay, the next guy, I don't want it to be like that. So it's not like you're consciously making this choice, but possibly because of your upbringing and your schemas and your templates for relationships, you unconsciously will choose the St. of the world and will, or the Asuelus of the world. Asuelu seems different now, but in the beginning, he, was the Kalani Asuelu dynamic was of codependency and underfunctioning, overfunctioning, underfunctioning. And so, that's what I would look at. And, it's similar to the incel group of people. Like, something is happening based on your personality. You go online, you find a group of people that have shared experiences, and then you invent a narrative that exonerates you from the responsibility. Now, Liz, I'm not saying you're at fault. Whoever relationally traumatized you is at fault, that pushed you into codependency. And listen to all my episodes on codependency. I've talked about this a lot. So listen, I did a whole patron deep dive. I did several patron follow-up episodes on codependency. So listen to all that. I don't know, Liz, if that's the case for you, but it sounds like that to me. Stephanie video. Julia says, I definitely have a defective schema, and I relate a lot to Stephanie. So I was hypothesizing, does Stephanie have a defective schema? I have an hypothesis about oversharing on a first date. When you feel that you are defective or broken or hard to love, sometimes you decide that people need to know all of your baggage up front. Dr. Kirk, this was an incredible episode. I have a feeling I'm going to relate a lot to the storyline. This episode was frighteningly relevant to me, so it's hard to read the comments that are so hard on Stephanie. Let's remember how much pain she could be in. Yeah, absolutely. Are people being hard on Stephanie? Sometimes I'm a little surprised as to who people are hard on. And I'm like, we shouldn't be hard on any of these. I mean, there's a couple people that are being, what should I say? I think we should be hard on certain behaviors. When Nicole put hands on and was physically abusive to Azan, we can look at that and say, no, you cannot do that. It's not okay. When, Big Ed did some things. But I would hope that y'all understand these are human beings, and if your life was filmed and put on TV and edited in a certain way, would you want everyone to hate you? Do unto others, that kind of thing. Jennifer says, the talk about looking at it had me rolling. Right. So Stephanie was talking about, a certain sexual position and saying like, you're looking at my thing. She didn't want that to happen. The talk about looking at it had me rolling with laughter. I asked my hubby, and he says he's too busy enjoying the other sensational stuff to stop and look at that. Just adding to the conversation, LOL. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, really? Are dudes looking? Is that what they're focusing? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of other things happening in that moment, since, physically and visually that wouldn't, and plus, like, who cares anyway. But along those lines, Stephanie definitely seems to have some issues about body shame, as most people do. So I think the show gives us an opportunity to kind of look at that in our society and ourselves, and I hope the best for her. I hope that she can. I think she's, she wants romance, she wants sex, she wants companionship, and I think she has a lot of relational traumas that she's kind of working through, and I think she's doing it pretty well. When you do that kind of stuff, it gets real messy, and she's going through it. So, kudos to her. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.